first of all, I want to give credit where credit is due, even though he's not here. There was a Major Alpins at West Point. He was an instructor, and he gave a series of lectures on small arms development. No, I didn't go to West Point. Anyway, the Army made videos of it and sent it out to all the military bases, and I'm probably one of the few people who ever signed them out and watched them from the Training Aid Service Office. But I was very impressed with the way he explained small arms development in history, and maybe someday ASP will be able to put them out for the general public. When gunpowder was discovered to be useful as a weapon, it had a major impact. And what you're going to see is what happens in Europe is going to be reflected in North America. Okay? Most of the change is going to occur there, and it's going to be reflected over here in North America. Originally, gunpowder was used for cannons. That was the whole idea, was to blow holes in castle walls. The idea of a hand cannon, something one person could manipulate, took quite a while to develop. And you had to have some kind of an ignition system. The problem was on the early guns, the matchlocks. Because of the metal technology at that time, metallurgy, they had to make them pretty thick and heavy. And the gunpowder, they were still experimenting with how much potassium, how much charcoal, how much saltpeter, sulfur, whatever. All kind of experimentation was taking place. Now, the three things I'm going to be coming back to over and over again in regards to the arms of the United States Army is three major factors: range, rate of fire, terminal effect. Those are going to be three critical components that they're going to constantly have to deal with. Is how far can it shoot, how much damage does it do, and how many times a minute can you fire it. Now with the matchlock, you had a real problem because it would take anywhere from a half a minute to a minute to reload. And all over Europe, people were trying to figure out ways to speed up the process. Now, Gustav Adolphus of Sweden, he created for his army what was called the caracol. You have a guy stand in front. First of all, you had matchlock, this big, heavy thing. You had to have a forked stick. You had to stick it in the ground. You had to lay the thing down on the stick and level it. There was no aiming. You leveled it. You fired it with the burning match. You then picked up your stick, walked to the back of the five guys behind you, and the next guy would step up, and he would level it, he'd fire, and the goal was to get 6 rounds a minute. The rate of fire was really 1 round a minute, but you had 6 ranks. And the idea was if you could throw 6 rounds a minute across the battlefield, chances are the other guy wasn't going to run the 50 yards and try to stab you, as long as there was some lead going out toward him. So the magic goal for a long time was, how can you get 6 rounds a minute downrange? All right? Now, in North America, there were no major league battles, okay? Now, Captain John Smith of Pocahontas fame, okay, when he was in Jamestown, he had a matchlock, and he found that when he fired it, the noise and everything else scared the Indians a hell of a lot, as well as caused terminal damage. But with the match, you always had problems, and as a matter of fact, that's what messed him up. He had gunpowder in a bag, he had a match, 2 got together at an inopportune time, and boom on him, and he had to be put on a boat and sent back to England to recover. And while he was in England, he ran into this religious cult that wanted to go to Virginia, and he wanted to be their military advisor. They turned him down and hired Miles Standish instead. All right? Now, in France, New France, Samuel Champlain's called the father of New France, he too had a matchlock that made a significant impact on the Native Americans. All right? When the Hurons had a boundary dispute with their enemies to the south, the Iroquois, during one of their negotiations, him and his partner came out, set up their arquebuses or matchlocks, blasted away 2 members of the other side's delegation, making the Hurons very happy and deciding that they wanted to be friends with the French. The Iroquois went south and made friends with the Dutch and the English. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Now, the trouble with the matchlocks, of course, you couldn't attack at night because you couldn't fit the enemy sentries into thinking it's a whole bunch of fireflies heading toward them, all right? If you were on horseback, having this match running around, burning your horse, that would ruin their day. So they had to find a way to have an ignition system that didn't require a burning match all the time. So they went to the wheel lock, the snap hands, and eventually they went to what we now call the flintlock. All right? So in the early 1700s, the flintlock is going to become the weapon of the military. The smoothbore flintlock musket. Now, in North America, a lot of battles were fought, were more skirmishes, okay? You know, when Washington went out and, you know, he got ambushed and so forth. Flintlocks. There were no set-piece battles. Now, the French, to develop a way to increase their rate of fire, they would line up in 4 ranks. They would have the best shot up front. He would level the musket, fire it, hand it back. Somebody handed him another musket.
Excellent.
He'd fire it, hand it back. And that was their method. The British, on the other hand, used 2 ranks. The first rank would fire. While they're loading, the second rank would line up. After so many seconds, they would fire, start to load, and then the first rank would get ready again. And there were 3 ways of doing this. One was volley fire. That was the preferred method. You all shoot at the same time. There was sequential fire. The officer would give the command, and the person next to him would fire his musket and start to load it. The next guy would then fire his musket, start to load it. So go down the line, boom, 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 boom. And then there was fire at will, which was if you see something, you fire it, you load it, your speed. You don't have to worry about everybody else getting ready. All right? Now, the only major battle in North America before the Revolution was on the Plains of Abraham, outside of Quebec, in which the British and the British and the French exchanged volleys in the traditional European sense. Now, the importance of it is, okay, the French lose. And as part of their loss, they leave behind their muskets. Okay, and that becomes important. They leave behind their muskets, and they sail back to France as part of the deal. And the muskets get brought home by the provincials, the colonials. And so there's a lot of French muskets floating around North America, all right? Now, as conditions between Britain and the colonies started to get a little rough, okay, there's going to be the issue of gun control, all right? The colonists are starting to have military muskets made on the sly, the original ghost guns. They're having gunsmiths make copies of the Brown Bess but not leave any markings on them. So the gunsmith cannot be charged with treason, okay? So they're creating ghost guns. They also have leftover French muskets. And contrary to popular belief that every American home had a musket hanging over the fireplace type thing, a lot of times people didn't have anything, or they had a fowler or a sporting gun. Or in a family, you might have the family musket and the father and the 3 sons. And when one was called up for duty, he'd take the musket. When he got home, he gave it to his son who was taking his place in the militia duty. So, you know, they weren't all over the place. And my favorite is I one time saw a Christmas card you could buy, and it shows a nice Kentucky rifle over the fireplace, and hanging off the end is the powder horn. And I don't think that would have been a smart move. Okay, but anyway. Now, what distinguished a musket from a fowler? So if you're Lord Schumer in a parliament, and you want to ban assault muskets, okay, here are the features that you don't want those civilians to have. 1, a muzzle over 50 caliber. Gee, that sounds familiar. All right? You don't want a thick buttstock with a metal butt plate, because that's part of the weapon is, you know, hitting people and clubbing them. You don't want a bayonet lug, because actually the musket was half the weapon, the bayonet was the other half. And most of all, right here, this is the original high-capacity magazine, steel ramrod. Because with the steel ramrod, you could fire 3 shots a minute. Why not with a wooden one? Because a wooden one would often, under pressure, snap, messing up your barrel. Now you're stuck with a piece of wood down your muzzle, and you can't do anything. A steel ramrod was considered a major component in differentiating a civilian versus a military musket. How did that ever happen? The Prussians in Europe, they replaced all their wooden ramrods with metal ones, and they could rapidly fire and keep going and not have guns jammed, broken pieces of wood jammed in their barrel and so forth. So everybody went for this. As a matter of fact, the New Jersey Militia Act actually said you're to bring your musket or your follower with a steel ramrod. Okay? Now, the effective range was about 50 yards. All right? But there weren't enough of these around. Now, when Washington takes command of the Continental Army, that's what we consider the birth of the U.S. Army, on June 14, 1775, and he goes to Boston to, grab up all these militia units, everything else, he asks for volunteers. Pennsylvania, Virginia, Maryland, send him volunteers, and they show up with no guns. Well, when you join the British Army, they give you a gun. You join the American Army, aren't you going to give me a gun? He doesn't have them, okay? So he's got a problem right from the start. We don't have enough of these around. Now, we sent a delegation to France, okay, to try to negotiate something secretly with the French, who they don't particularly care for the British. Well, they decide they will help us as long as they can't be traced back to them. So what do? They go all over France, and they grab all the Model 1728 muskets they can find, all right, and any other ones that give them plausible deniability. You caught one of your provincials with a 1728? Must be one of the ones we left at Quebec when you threw us out. Okay? So what they do is they create a shell company in the Netherlands that goes around and buys up all the obsolete and unserviceable pre-1763 French muskets they can find. They are then shipped to the Dutch West Indies, where by pure chance there are American ships from Charleston, Providence, Rhode Island, New York, Philadelphia. And they grab all these muskets, they bring them to North America, and they find out that a lot of them are unserviceable. So, using the principle of the 80% receiver, they send them out to gunsmiths to repair. Remember, these are not interchangeable parts. Everything was custom made in those days. And the frisons on a lot of them were shot to shit. So they convert the muskets. Now we're getting equipped with muskets for everybody. But we still have a problem, lack of discipline. The Battle of Long Island, a lot of militiamen found out you can run faster from the British if you drop your musket. Okay? So, we got a problem. And along comes Baron von Steuben, who was actually only a captain, was accused of molesting children. Long story, anyway. Von Steuben ends up claiming to be a general and having been on the Prussian royal staff and some other garbage. But he's America's first drill sergeant. And he starts teaching Washington's troops how to use the musket and the bayonet. The musket and the bayonet. And he creates a drill manual. And that drill manual is going to be used up until the War of 1812. But the first weapon of the American Army is a smoothbore flintlock, either French or British. All right? Now, when the war is over, we're going to make our own muskets. We can copy the British, we can copy the French. We decide to copy the French. But we start making them on the French design. All right? So, the War of 1812 rolls along. We're again using smoothbore flintlocks, and the British are still using the brown Bess. So they end up meeting each other on the battlefield again, except now we have more domestically produced smoothbore flintlocks with their range of roughly 50 yards with accuracy. All right, at the end of the War of 1812, a guy by the name of Winfield Scott is sent to Europe to find out how they fight their wars. And he gets there a little after the Battle of Waterloo, and he studies what went on. He comes back, and he writes a manual on how to fight with the flintlock. Also, him and all the others are impressed by what they learned in Europe. So anybody going to West Point is going to read Jomini, who was this professional soldier from Switzerland who held commissions in both the Russian and the French armies. And the smoothbore flintlock is the state of the art. That is your weapon of war. All right? Now, in 1842, the percussion cap starts being used. And now, this one here is a model 1842. It's got sights on it. which they normally didn't have. John, what's the story on the sights on this one? There's a story behind it. Because I have one of these and mine doesn't have sights.
The story is, the 1842s, they manufactured them. There was a 69 caliber smoothbore musket. 1855 comes along and the mini ball makes an appearance, and this is the 1855 rifle below, down below there. But they've got all these 1842 smoothbores. So they rifled some of them. They rifled about 25,000 of them, and they put a long-range rear sight on them. Now, if you look at that gun, it's got a little musket sight
Right.
on it. It's a large musket sight. 1860, an order came to Harper's Ferry from Allegheny Arsenal. They wanted 500 rifled muskets. So the commandant at Harper's Ferry said, let's make 500 muskets. They said, well, we broke the jig for the long-range sight. He said, well, make a big musket sight and stick it on there. So now they manufacture 500 of these. They take the smoothbore musket and they bore it out, and it's rifled. And Angus and I fired this, and it shot quite well. And they shipped by water mostly in those days. The water was high, they didn't ship. So what happened in 1861? Confederates raided the arsenal at Harper's Ferry to get guns. Basically, those 500 muskets were still in stock at Harper's Ferry. So the Union troops tried to burn everything so it wouldn't fall into Confederate hands. If you look at that stock, you'll see it's a dark, very coarse-grained stock. That gun was recovered from the fire at Harper's Ferry and restocked at Richmond Arsenal. That very coarse stock is very typical of Richmond. You won't see that on a regular 1842. You'll see a much lighter colored stock. So that's one of about 5 or 6 that are known from that fire, and that's probably the nicest one. So
Very good. Now below it is a conversion of a flintlock to percussion. All right. You see here where they used to have a pan, and it's got a nipple on top. Now in 1842, theoretically, the standard arm of the U.S. Army is the model 1842, a smoothbore musket percussion system. All right? The war with Mexico breaks out. And here's what starts to happen. The regular army, to an extent, has percussion guns. All the volunteer militia units basically have mostly flintlocks. Now, here's going to be the issue. General Taylor had what's called the Army of Occupation, which was in Texas. And they're going to fight. The goal is going to be to hurt the Mexicans enough that they'll negotiate and give away all that good land that President Polk wanted to buy from them in the first place. But to really solidify it, maybe we need to invade Mexico. So Winfield Scott is given what's called the Army of Mexico. They do the first major amphibious landing at Veracruz, and they're going to march on the capital because they've been studying Napoleon and Napoleonic tactics. You capture the capital of the enemy country, they then negotiate a surrender, and you march home. So that's their goal. But Winfield Scott is afraid of this new percussion system. He says, what if I can't get percussion caps? My muskets are useless. I want flintlocks. He wanted his army to have flintlocks because you can renap a flint if necessary. Also, the Mexican army is armed with our old adversary, the brown Bess. And we can use their flints. We can also use their gunpowder, but we really don't want to. If you read the book on the Alamo Defenders, the Texans would take Mexican guns and take the flints, and sometimes their guns, but they did not want to use Mexican gunpowder. Mexico had a real problem. It seems that their gunpowder tended to break down into its 3 individual components when traveling over rough roads. And at the Battle of Palo Alto, the Americans could actually see the cannonballs coming toward them and move out of the way. All right? So he's going to go with flintlocks. And he's going to use the same tactics that were used in the War of 1812 and the American Revolution. Your ranks, you're firing by volley, you're not aiming. All right? Now, the bad news is the war with Mexico convinces Americans that the tactics of the Napoleonic Wars work. And that's going to cause a lot of unnecessary deaths in the first few years of the Civil War. Because in 1847, in France, they're going to create the mini ball. And that's going to have a major, major impact on how battles should be fought. Now, in 1855, all right, the United States adopts a rifled musket, okay? It's going to use the mini ball. It's going to be reduction in caliber, the 58 caliber. Okay, we've gone from 69 to 58. Now, what's going to be the impact? Well, Secretary of War Jefferson Davis, who you'll run into later, gets a guy called Major William Hardee. Now, for you real Civil War nerds, you have the Hardee hat. William Hardee is told, rewrite the manuals, because we have this new weapon here that can reach out and touch people at 250, 300 yards. Hardee's solution is two things. One is he eliminates shoulder to shoulder in the ranks, because that guarantees a hit. He says, this could be shoot some space so some of those mini balls can fly either side and not hit anybody. And he changes the pace at marching across the battlefield from quick step to double quick step, which is a little faster, so you clear the dead zone a little faster, all right? But that's about it. And his manual gets reprinted by both the North and the South. Both of them, this is the book. This is the book you study when you're at night, by candlelight, when you used to be a store clerk, now you're a major, and you read this book on how you're going to fight. The problem was, it was really geared toward smoothbore tactics. Now, at the Battle of Fredericksburg, there was a General Cobb who commanded the Confederates. People keep telling me it's Maurice Heights, others go Mare's Heights. Anybody know what it's pronounced? It was a sunken road.
Yeah.
Okay? He told his men, don't shoot till you can count the brass buttons on the Yankee coats. This is almost like shoot thieves, when you can see the whites of their eyes. When in effect they had guns that could have reached out and nailed them as they were trying to cross the Rappahannock on a pontoon bridge. But instead they're holding their fire because the book says when they get within like 50, 40 yards, now you fire, all right? So there's a big change in regards to the capabilities of the rifle musket, which is not always going to be as easy as it is for you and me. We're gun people. We are in our comfort zone when we're at the range. We have brand new DuPont or other gunpowder. We have replica guns that are totally safe. We had a good meal. We drove to the range. We're over cover. We're not 20-year-olds who slept in their wool uniform, just had a cup of coffee and 2 pieces of hardtack, and nobody the hell is shooting back at us. All right? So, getting 3 shots off, big cloud of smoke, and at your target, they're shooting at you and there's a big cloud of smoke, so you're shooting into the smoke, through the smoke. All right? Now, not everybody was locked into those manuals. There was a General August, last name begins with a W, Pennsylvania. He got captured early in the war, sent to Libby's prison in Richmond. And while he's sitting there thinking about when I get out, and he gets exchanged, he developed assault fire. He had his men fire. The first rank would fire, and while they're loading, the second rank would walk past them and through the smoke. Then they would fire, and this group would walk past them and through the smoke. And this way they were constantly advancing while by firing volleys. Now, during the Civil War, it was determined that the defense had the advantage. Of the 8 major battles of the Civil War, where one side was dug in and another side attacked, the dug-in side won 7 out of the 8. If you were in a trench and you had a top log, if you had enough time to put up a log, your head didn't silhouette nice, and the mini ball that would have hit your forehead hit the log, you were in a pretty good position. Now, if you had extra muskets, that was nice, but a lot of times you didn't. The only case I found where people had extra muskets, flintlocks, was the Alamo. At the Alamo, when they had defeated the Mexicans and they went into the Alamo, they had kept all the Mexican muskets. So they lined them up. And they could fire, put one down, fire, put one down, fire, put one down, fire, put one down. Now you got to load. your rate of fire is not going to be increasing, and you can't go to battle carrying 3 or 4 loaded muskets. It's not going to work, okay? So that was the problem. Now, when the Civil War ends, all right, the United States had produced thousands and thousands, millions of muskets. You mentioned Richmond. Richmond Arsenal produced, using Harper's Ferry machinery, 31,000 rifled muskets during the Civil War. Springfield Armory was cranking out 2,000 a month and had 16 subcontractors like Trenton and the others making guns. So when the war ends, there's this massive amount of rifled muskets in the American inventory, millions and millions and millions of rounds of ammunition sitting in the inventory. So Congress is not going to be too keen when the generals go to Congress and go, they're obsolete, we need a cartridge firing firearm. You sure you can't keep using these? We got 1 million of them. We got millions and millions of rounds of ammunition. Well, General Sheridan is going to say, you really have 2 choices. You either give my people cartridge firearms out west, or you give me an army 5 times the size I have now. Because 1 man and armed with a cartridge firing firearm is equal to 5 guys firing these muzzle loaders. So the Army starts experimenting, and Congress is getting mad because they try this, they try this, they try that. Finally, they basically tell them, come to a conclusion, fast. And Erskine Allen is pushing his trapdoor design. Remington's got the rolling block. Peabody's got the falling block, which is going to eventually become the Martini Henry. And Sheridan likes the rolling block. He feels that's the gun we really need. But Erskine Allen convinces Congress that I can make them cheaper, we got the machinery, we're going to go to what's called the trapdoor design. Now, the trapdoor design, rate of fire. At Governor's Island, yep, New York Harbor, they found recruits could fire 12 aimed shots a minute and a veteran could fire 20. All right, so your rate of fire has definitely gone up, okay? What they didn't point out was there wasn't any marksmanship training. In those days, you fire when the officer tells you to and just level your gun all the same when we give you the volley command. That's why in 1871 the National Rifle Association was created, to teach marksmanship, because they didn't teach it in the military. As a matter of fact, the way you fired your gun is if you had picket duty, you loaded your musket, whatever one you had, a muzzle loader, you stood guard. When you got off guard, you found a tree or something, fired it, then went and cleaned the gun. That was your marksmanship training, okay? Now you're going to have serious marksmanship training. And next month, when we have our presentation, you're going to talk about the Buffington site. Now we're talking about maybe teaching guys to shoot, rather than, we'll give you a command, you fire it in a volley. Now, you notice the gun is still long. You still wanted 2 ranks. You still wanted volley fire. All right? Well, time marches on. Smokeless powder comes along. So the next thing is going to be, what gun can we get in smokeless? All right, so we've gone from 69 caliber to 45 caliber, and now we're going to 30 caliber. And they decide to pick the Krag. Now, which they're going to realize later was a mistake. Everybody loves the Krag. It's beautiful action, smooth, everything else. And it's a repeater. Yeah. Okay, you got your rounds in the trapdoor there that opens up, you put in your rounds, and you can fire 1 at a time. And then if you need to, in a hurry, to fire more shots, okay, flip the magazine, cut off 5 shots. What happens then? You have to individually pull out cartridges from your belt and put them into the side. Same as you would if you had a Trapdoor Springfield. You're back to 1 round at a time again. And of course, the limitation of the Krag is going to appear very fast in the Spanish-American War when they go up against the Spanish Mauser. Because in Europe, they decided that the tubular feed, like the Mauser 71-84, is it? Okay. The Lebel, you're still back to 1 round at a time to reload. Yes, you can fire a bunch of shots in a hurry and empty the magazine, but once the magazine is empty, you're no faster than somebody with a single-shot rifle. All right? So we're going to have to go to some other mechanism, all right? There were 2 competing designs in Europe, the Mannlicher end block and the Mauser stripper clip. The end block, it's a package. You put the whole thing into the gun, you shoot it, put another package in, the clip drops out of the hole in the bottom, or you put it in a little trapdoor or something. And then there was the Mauser. So you put it there, you feed it in, the pressure of the round going up, bolt going forward, the stripper clip flies out of the way, you're back in business. You can continue rapidly doing it. You don't need volley fire. You don't need another guy behind you while the first guy's loading, because it's seconds to reload and fire again. So we developed the 03 Springfield, okay? That's going to be our answer to the Mauser. And it's our answer to the Mauser to the point that we owed Mauser $200,000 in patent infringements, 5 on the gun and 2 on the stripper clip. And we refused to pay it on the grounds when World War I started, that they're an enemy country, we don't need to owe them shit. And afterwards, in the 1920s, the court said, no, 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 no. What you did was unconstitutional. You owe them the money plus interest. And Mauser got their money, and the 03 was going to be the standard American rifle. World War I comes along. We don't have enough of these. So we have to adopt another gun, the 17 Enfield, which is the P14 adopted for the American cartridge. When the war is over, there's a question. What should be the standard American infantry rifle? This is made in the USA. This is made in the USA. 75% of our troops in World War I are using this. It's got certain advantages over this. This has got certain advantages, so I'm going to go through them real fast. Front sight. Protected front sight. Nice, good, strong wings. This has a delicate sight. That's why you have to have the sight protector. The sight back there is protected. This one isn't. The sight back there is a peep sight that is very good for combat. You know, the back of the receiver. This is toward the front of the receiver. But this is adjustable for windage. That isn't. This holds 5 rounds. This holds 6 rounds. This is made on machinery the U.S. government owns, operates, and can continue to make. This belonged to 3 private companies. They're no longer making them. They're no longer making parts for them. So the decision is made, this will be the war reserve. This will continue to be the standard. But in the 1920s and early 30s, 2 countries just did research on developing a good semi-automatic, the Soviet Union and the United States. Other countries toyed around with the idea, but the 2 serious countries were the Soviet Union and the United States. And also was realized during the First World War that the cartridges were overpowered. You didn't need it. Most combat was taking place under 200 yards. Yes, your gun can reach out and touch people at a long range, but you don't see them or you don't get an opportunity. So the original work was to create basically a smaller cartridge. That is stopped by General Douglas MacArthur, who's Chief of Staff. He goes, no, 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 no. We were getting ready for the big spring offensive of 1919. We got tons and tons of 30-06. It's used in the BAR, it's used in the machine guns, it fits our war reserve rifles. You make your semi-auto in 30-06. So they have to redesign and everything else. And of course, they developed the famous M1, which is going to be, called the greatest battle implement. It was in 1945. All right? So we have the M1, semi-automatic, and one of the geniuses of Garand is he created an end-block clip that didn't have a hole in the bottom because it flew out the top. Now you had an end-block clip, boom, right in, you're done. It flies out for you. You don't have to pull it out or anything else. Worry about dropping it out the bottom. You shove another 8-round magazine in. And of course, American production capacity. We could supply these to basically every Marine and Army infantryman that needed one in World War II. Frontline infantry are going to have the M1. All right? When the war is over, we still use these in Korea. Our enemy, potential enemy, is the Warsaw Pact, the Soviet Union. They've gone to an intermediate cartridge. The British are experimenting with an intermediate cartridge. The Spanish are experimenting with an intermediate cartridge by using German engineers who, for whatever reason, had to leave the Third Reich. Okay. Now, the United States, as the main partner in NATO, basically says, if you don't play by our rules, we're taking our ball and going home. We want a full-size battle rifle. We want one that's got the capability of the M1. Well, propellants have improved greatly during that time, And they create what's called the 7.62 NATO, which is a 30-06 with better powder and a shorter case and so forth. And we're going to insist that the military rifles of all NATO nations be in the same caliber. It's called interoperability. All right? So we can send tank shells that'll fit in their tanks, rifle ammunition, even uniforms will have a NATO size label sometimes, okay? The other countries aren't too happy about it, but you know, we don't play by their rules, they're going to take the ball and go home. So the United States develops an advanced M1, and that's the M14, which you cannot get because it's considered a machine gun. So I have here an M1A, which is a civilian counterpart. In 1971, 50 years ago, I was in Texas, stationed at Fort Hood, and there was a gun shop in a town called Belton, which wasn't that far from Fort Hood. And there was a guy there called LJZ Gunsmithing. And he took M1 Garand receivers and took M14 parts and built pseudo M14s. He replaced the clip latch with one from a BM59. He modified M14 magazines so they would snap in. And he produced a real nice shooting gun, the LJZ. I bought mine before I left. When I got back to New Jersey, going to the range with my LJZ. You know, where'd you get the M14? You know, not an M14. Look on the back, it says M1. It did, it would say Springfield Army M1, you know, the whole bit. But everything else was M14. About 3 years later, Springfield Armory got created, and they created the M1A. Now, if you love the M1, if you like the M1, you can love an M14. Now, I took basic training in 1970. I was issued an M14, all right? Now, the marksmanship training, I was very fortunate, and I was trained on what's called trained fire. That meant I never fired at bullseyes in basic training. We always fired at things like this. Because there was a very important book came out, if you ever get a chance to read it in the library or whatever, Men Against Fire by S.L.A. Marshall. He studied what happened in World War II. He found out 3 out of 4 infantrymen never fired their rifles. A couple of reasons. One, they're hesitant about taking human life. 2, they didn't see anything worth shooting. 3, they felt it wouldn't make any difference whether they shot or not. Now, guys who were in elite units like paratroopers or Marines, they tended to shoot more. Guys who had a heavier weapon like a BAR would shoot more, and guys who were near the guy with the BAR would shoot more. And they felt they had to change the training regimen. So when I went through basic training, we only fired at silhouette targets. And even now, I can tell you the bad thing about it. We were given these targets, we were put on a range, and you had to fire at 48 targets to qualify. I forget how many you had to hit. But you only got 48 rounds. You'd be in your foxhole down there at Fort Dix. Target would pop up at 50 meters, 150, 200, 250, 300, 350. As the target popped up, you got to shoot one shot at it. If you missed, too bad, wait for the next target to come up. That's not good combat training. Okay? And the guy scoring you knew when the next target was going to, knew where the next target was going to go. He'd yell at you, go, next target 200, next target 50. So, you know, you started scoring, you know, looking at the 50 range, and all of a sudden one of these would pop up. And again, if you missed, too bad. Later on, they changed it, and they gave you more than 48 rounds, because they were teaching you, you're not a sniper, it's not one shot, one kill. If you miss with your first shot, put another one in. You miss with that one, put another one in. If you can see the strike of the bullet, immediately do some Kentucky windage, all right? So we were firing at these targets. Now, the M14 was designed to meet the NATO requirement, and when we were told, it replaces the BAR, the M1 carbine, and the M3 grease gun. No. No. It replaced the M1. It was too light to replace the BAR and had a very high cyclic rate of 750 rounds. It was just too light. Now, when is it going to get its first combat use? Marines, 1965, Vietnam. They go in with M14s. And they start complaining. A big complaint was that, hey, it's too heavy. At the weight of an M1. The other was the wood stocks were warping, and that was causing problems. So they came out with the nylon stock. Now, when I was in basic training, some guys had the nylon stock. I had a wood stock, but you know, they were still mixing around. They tried to get, make a change. The Marines just felt that it was overpowered for what they needed compared to the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong that were running around with SKSs and AK-47s. All right? So there were a lot of complaints. Well, in 1963, Curtis LeMay was head of the Air Force. He did not like the M14. The Air Force at that time, their obligation was they need to protect the airfield. The doctrine at that time, it's been changed, is the Air Force is responsible for protecting everything from the fence line into the airbase. Beyond the fence line, that's the Army's problem. Okay? So the M1 carbine, for them, was perfectly adequate. Okay? Now the M1 carbine's obsolete, being filled that the M14 is too much. Well, they get very impressed by a new gun called the AR-15, which is being represented by what's called the rubber ducky, for those of you ever in the service. It's used for bayonet training. It's a simulated firearm, okay? We call them the rubber ducky. Now, they get this gun, they like it, they start using it for security. And in Vietnam, their advisors are carrying this. When they run into special forces, they're impressed with the gun. And they ask, can we get a couple of them? Well, it's not the standard gun. You're supposed to have an M14. Can you get us a couple on a special order? And we will, try them out. And they start being very impressed with it. So the Army says, well, maybe we will, but we're going to have to change it. The AR-15 did not have what's called a forward assist.
Forward assist didn't have enough.
Didn't have it, didn't need it. Okay? Now, if those of you who ever owned an M1 carbine, there's no cleaning kit in the buttstock. Your early AR-15, M16, same thing. It's a solid buttstock, no cleaning kit. Why is there no cleaning kit? Well, if you were in the Air Force, now, you got to realize that military people, we have our own little gigs against each other, The Army is the big brother, because it was first. Then came the Navy. And then the Marine Corps is the little Army that's part of the Navy. And the Navy and the Marine Corps are our brother services. The Air Force is referred to as the sister service, with all the sexism that implies. All right. Now, they get this gun. They're not used to cleaning guns or carrying cleaning kits because they're not out in the mud and the crud. You're on an air base. You're pulling duty. When it's done, you take it back to the arms room, take out a cleaning kit, clean the gun, put it away. Now you're issuing these guns to people out in the field, in the mud and the crud. No cleaning kits. Plus, ammunition. The early ammunition was made by DuPont. It was fairly clean. Not clean, but now we're using some Remington and others, and they're fouling the guns. And I know when I was in college, I think 66, 67, reading stories about Marines being found dead with broken down M16s next to them. Because the guns had jammed. Because they had been told, you don't need to clean these guns. There's no cleaning kit in the back because you don't need it. Wrong answer. You have to clean it. Okay? Now, they start working the bugs out of the gun in the hard way with blood. Okay? And now the Army is using M16s. The paratroopers already have them. Special Forces has them. The Air Cavalry has them. The Marines are using it in Vietnam. Everywhere else, it's the M14. Now, I said I took basic training in 1969, M14. By 1970, the M14 is basically being pulled out, put into storage. Everybody's being trained on the M16s. All right? Now, with the M16, what about NATO? We told them they had to have a standard caliber. Now we're telling them, yeah, it's going to be 5.56. And the magazines have to be interchangeable with the ones in the M16. So they have to change. Okay? And the M14 sort of goes away. Now, I handled one in 1970, okay, part of 71. Goodbye M14. Next time I get an M14 is 1986. I'm on the division rifle team, and they hand me an M14 and send me to Camp Santiago, Puerto Rico. I thought I was a good shot. Always got expert. I'm now firing at 600 yards in the prone position with an M14. And I'm like, oh, I got a 7, a couple of 8s. Oh, I got a 10. I got an X. Ooh. I got to work the pits. Whoever is on my lane, X's, 10s, 9s. 9s are the flyers. Okay? And I'm going, you know what? With iron sights, this rifle can reach out and touch people at quite a distance. You know what you're doing. And I think that's the realization. The M14 has been brought back into service as a designated marksman rifle. It's a good rifle. Okay. Now, with the M16, we told our allies, you're going to have to go 5.56 now if you want to have interchangeability with us, and gun's got to use M16 magazines. Well, the Belgians go, there's got to be ways to improve this gun and any ammunition. And they start working on the ammunition. And they create what we call the green tip, which they say will penetrate Warsaw Pact body armor. Terminal effect, okay, one of the factors. So we're going to adapt and change the M16 to the A2 model. Now, this is a civilian A2 model here. It's going to show you some of the important characteristics that you need to be aware of how they changed it from the M16. All right? They made the butt stock longer. It's got a little trap door. That's for your cleaning kit. Yeah, you got to clean this gun, guys. The Marines wanted a rear sight that was finger adjustable, like on an M1 or on an M14. So they put in a sight you could adjust. Okay? The Army wanted something that didn't throw brass into left-handed shooters. So they put this little protrusion here. So when you, and also permits soldiers to fire from the left shoulder. That's what you need from where you're undercover, without getting brass into your face. The handguard was changed. The other handguard was designed for offhand shooting. It's a nice grip, but there's a left side and a right side. And when one breaks and you don't have the right one, you got problems. Both sides are the same here. The muzzle brake. The original ones had a prong on them that kept getting caught on vegetation. So they put in what they call the bird cage. But when you fired it, because it had a hole in the bottom, it would kick up dirt a lot of times, giving away your position. So what they did is, they made it more of a muzzle brake rather than a flash hider by making the bottom part solid. They made the barrel heavier. Okay? They changed twist in the barrel. Because now they were finding out you could have this gun effective up to 350 meters, which is all you need. So it's just as effective as an M14 for normal combat purposes. It's got a heavier barrel, longer stock. They also added finger grip groove here on the pistol grip. And they basically improved the M16 A1 to the A2 model. And then it was an A3 model for a while that had a 3-shot burst, but they went away from that. It gave you a weird trigger pull on semi-automatic. So they went back to safe semi, full auto. All right? Well, that should have been the end of the story, right? Well, another significant book that you can sometimes find in a military library is called Soldier's Load and the Mobility of a Nation. Very good book. It was printed around 1950. And it dealt with how we constantly keep adding stuff for a soldier to carry on the grounds he might need it. One suggestion, for example, I think it was in France, is that every soldier carry an axe in case he has to chop down the door. Okay, things like that. Just, we keep doing it. You keep loading soldiers up. Well, when that with body armor, we've really done a job on the American soldiers. Okay? And, well, one thing was, can we do something with the firearm itself? So I have another rubber ducky here. And one idea was to create a carbine that could have a adjustable stock, so when you're wearing body armor or not wearing body armor, adjustable sights, a thicker barrel so it can absorb heat better. And they found out that, again, with propellant changes and twist, you could give a guy a 14.5-inch barrel that could still reach out and touch people at 350 meters like a 20-inch barrel. So now, you've got a handier gun. Now, sometimes it's a little change in the gun that makes a big difference. Steel ramrod, okay? Stripper clips, semi-automatic. A big change now for the combat rifles is optics. CCO, close combat optics. Once you got the gun zeroed, and everybody, it's not a case of, okay, the SWAT team gets one, and Special Force, every soldier is getting one. And it's a case of, put the red dot on the guy and pull the trigger. Okay, or whatever design you want, little bullseye, boom, you got him. The bad news is, in Afghanistan, we were nailing so many Taliban with headshots that they were starting to complain that we were executing prisoners. How else can all of them have a bullet hole right there? Right? Now, what accuracy standard do you need? Okay? The minimum standard now for American battle rifles is 4 minute of angle. You go, what's crap? I can shoot better than that. Yes, you can. But 4 minute of angle is the minimum. Okay? So I brought this along to demonstrate. 4 minute of angle means 4 inches at 100 yards. Perfectly adequate. It means 8 inches at 200 yards. Perfectly adequate. 12 inches at 300. And, you know, a lot of rifles can get 2 minute of angle. All right? But if you can do 4 minute of angle, you're in business. All right? Also, now they're teaching soldiers, from what I understand, is magazine changes. You're in the foxhole for qualification, and none of this one shot, one kill. You're an infantryman. If the target's still standing up, put some more rounds that way. You don't have, you know, again, when I went through 48 rounds, 48 targets, now you might get 60 rounds for 48 targets.
That's until you get the combat. You hit the guy until he drops.
Right, you hit him until he drops.
The people that come up with all this training, they never go there.
Well,
you know?
they try to learn from the previous thing. Now, for a while, in the early 70s, they wanted us to get a 3-shot cloverleaf when we zeroed. And, you know, if you didn't get it, well, you need more instruction, you need more training. Then they went out and took like the best marksmen and gave them a stock M16s. A lot of the guns weren't capable of giving you 1 inch at 25 meters. The gun itself was not capable of doing it. All right? Now, I used to be a Boy Scout instructor at camp. One of the things I had to do every Sunday before the kids got to the range on Monday was to take every one of those 22 rifles, get into a good bench position, and fire a 3-shot group under a quarter. So when they went for the merit badge, if they claimed they couldn't do it,
Yeah. Bullshit.
it can't be done. If I couldn't get it under a quarter, that gun was to be put aside and not used at all, okay, or for instructional purposes. With an M16, if it can't, you know, it's got to group at least 4 minute of angle. Question somebody had on that, or? All right. So now, what do we see?
Just
Yeah.
back up slightly to the train fire.
Train
They
fire.
did in 64. The technique there was to hit the ground in front of it, and let the gravel break up and hit the target, because they would pop up targets.
Right, that was another trick we were told is shoot low because, right, when the target popped up in the sand there at Fort Dix, if you hit below it, you would see the strike of the bullet and it would throw the gravel up, and the targets were made out of plastic, this shape, and the machine was sort of sensitive, and if anything touched it, it would drop. And of course it would drop after 3 or 4 seconds anyway. So the other trick was, when you see it starting to move, just fire your gun and claim you hit it.
Well, when I grew up in Jesus Christ,
Also,
those things are so perforated.
Oh God,
You
yeah.
know, you could have a hit, you knew you had a hit, and it wouldn't go down.
Wouldn't go down.
So you'd wait for that click. You could hear the click and then fire, and then it would go down.
And theoretically, the sergeants would go out to the range and check each one and tap it to see if it would go down to make sure. But some of them, like I said, were so perforated, particularly the 30 caliber. If you were firing again M14, now with M16, it's smaller holes. But again, I took basic training with the M14. We were given a quickie course on the M16. I go to AIT, M14. We didn't shoot them, just lugged them around all the time. And then by spring of 70, you couldn't find an M14 with 16s everywhere. And when I joined the National Guard in the spring of 72, I think it was like March or April, the month before I arrived, they took all the M1s. And when I arrived, they had M16s. And it was range qualification. It's a little war story. We're on the bus going down to Seagirt to do qualification. And the sergeants are asking me, "You were in the regular Army, Gursky, weren't you?" "Yes, I was." "How do you fire this thing?" I gave them a class on the M16. They said, "All I know is the M1 and the carbine." All right? We get to the place and I'm shooting, and I'm shooting really good. And I'm going, "I hope I made expert." The guy goes, "Don't worry about it." "What do you mean, don't worry? Your scorecard's already at the armory." And after we were done qualifying, the guys go to the trunk of their cars or their duffel bags. They're pulling out Winchester 94s. I said, "Holy shit, I thought I joined the National Guard. No, Washington's militia. I didn't know I was supposed to bring my own." Anything else? The only other change that the Army is thinking about is changing calibers again. They're talking about, was it 6.5 Grendel or something?
Yeah, they're gonna.
6.8.
6.8? Yeah. Now it's interesting. We went from 69 caliber to 58 caliber to 45 caliber to 30 caliber to 5.56. Now, let's look at this from another point of view, okay? Assuming this was an M4, we've gone from rate of fire 3 rounds a minute to rate of fire 60 rounds a minute to effective range of 50 to 75 yards to 300 to 350 yards. Okay? You know, one-man portable machine gun, you know. And here's the other thing. I work with junior ROTC. We have girls and guys into high school. We took them to the range and we gave them ARs and put them out at 200 yards. And they were doing great. The good news, bad news is you can train young people to be effective combat marksmen. The bad news is around the world there are child soldiers.
You know.
Highly effective. You can take a 14-year-old and make him into a killer. Because he can handle one of these. He's not going to have much luck with this and this. The thing that we discovered, though, is we started the girls out on AR-15s. And a couple of the instructors brought their M1As and even M1s and even 03 Springfields. Once we taught them the fundamentals with this, and they got an M1A or an M1, they had no trouble. I swear, if we had started them with an M1 or something, they probably would have flinked and said, "Screw this shit, you know, I'm not doing this." Very, very effective. I hate to say it, weapons technology has gotten to the point where you can train, you know, boy soldiers, whatever, to be highly effective with one of these guns.
Simple rifle, very simple.
Very simple to operate, lightweight, easy to use, the whole bit. And of course, it's #1 on Beta Awards. Beta Awards. I have fun when I meet people like that, and they go, "Well, why do you need an AR-15? And I go, "Well, when you were in basic training," and they go, "I never joined the military." I go, "Figures."
I have a question on the revolutionary stuff.
Yeah, go.
The French guns, or Charleyville, they say, is a smaller caliber.
Yes.
Right? So was the smaller caliber able to reach out better than 50 yards?
Now, okay, the argument was, okay, the Brown Bess is 75 caliber, which is 12 gauge. You can make 12 lead bullets, 12 round balls out of a pound of lead. The Charleyville is 69, you can make 16 1-ounce lead balls, okay? It's still gonna rattle around inside, okay? I mean, that's the real problem, it's smoothbore. Now, the advantage you had is if you had French guns, you could throw them into your captured Brown Bess. If you captured Brown Bess ammo, you had to sometimes melt it and bring it down to the size you need. But besides buck and ball, oh yeah, that's another thing. The Americans right away went to buck and ball. The British used to refer to them as Yankee beans. All right? Now, at Lexington, I think 1 or 2 British soldiers got wounded at Lexington. Was it 7 or 8 Americans were killed? I think one guy got a small lead bullet in his hand, probably the buck, okay? The Americans, they caught, 75 cal lead balls plus a bayonet, okay? So, the casualties were much higher at Lexington. Lexington's not really a battle, it's more of a massacre. Concord is a battle. Concord was a battle, but Lexington, the Americans were already moving back. Then somebody fired a shot, nobody knows who. The British broke discipline and fired a volley. And guys got shot in the back and whatever, you know, they were heading home. Concord, now you had a battle, back and forth, you know, across the Concord Bridge. Yes?
Yeah, most of the British were wounded or killed, were killed on their way back.
On the way back, right, on the trail back, that's where the casualties were.
Because we fought like Indians instead of British
Well,
square.
no, here's the thing, that's always a big thing. You know, we fought like Indians and they fought like they were in Europe. Both sides used open field tactics and forest tactics. The side that was going to win was the one that could master both. Okay? And with von Steuben, the real test is going to be the Battle of Monmouth. That's where we stand toe-to-toe. Now, we claimed victory at Monmouth because we stood toe-to-toe and we were still on the field when it was over. The problem was, we were fighting the British rear guard. They weren't intending to stay at Monmouth. They were heading for Staten Island. All they wanted to do was slow us down so they could get to where they wanted to be, which was New York City, which was the big stronghold for the British during the war. So, in the sense that von Steuben's people held their ground at Monmouth, they felt, and that they were still there the next morning, to them it was a victory, and the training and everything else had paid off. If it wasn't for the French giving us help, it wouldn't have worked. I mean, they gave us engineers. Starting in 1778, they started supplying us with muskets, not leftovers from the French and Indian War. And I always tell the story of when the French sent us their old muskets, probably somewhere there was a meeting. And somebody went up and goes, as always, should you or any of your military advisory group in North America be captured or killed,
Yeah, we don't
the
know.
court of Versailles will disavow any knowledge or your mission. Good luck, Lafayette.
Yeah, you're on your own.
You're on your own.
How far was it lethal?
Oh,
Accurate
100 yards lethal.
Okay.
But the chance of hitting anybody was more
chance.
God.
Bad luck.
Chance.
Chance. Yeah, and that was the reality. Again, the Mexican War validated to many Americans the tactics that they had been studying for years and years. The Napoleonic tactics.
Yeah, but you gotta remember one thing. We go to Civil War, and these generals, see how the men are dying, face to face.
Yeah.
Couldn't they think like, hey, we gotta change this?
Yeah.
You
think
ain't gotta
they
go
would
by
have
the book, man. You just gotta go by the situation.
Yeah, you think they would have adapted better, but you
Yeah,
gotta remember
they
you had the guys who were the generals in the Civil War were the lieutenants and captains of the Mexican War.
I know. They were all West Pointers. They were all trying the same.
Not only, okay, you had West Pointers, but you also had guys who were sitting there reading Hardy's Manual at night. Okay? Because that's what was available. That was military science at that time.
Yeah, but you gotta look at the situation.
You got to adapt.
Yeah,
Right.
they
And
didn't.
They didn't.
And even at the beginning of the Civil War, when they were short of smoothbore muskets, there's one there, it's a conversion, that third one down is
Right.
a conversion. But they took about 25,000 Class 1 flintlock muskets and Hughes and Phillips and Newark converted them to percussion.
All right. It was estimated the Confederate government procured 183,000 smoothbore muskets and 439,000 rifles, and the Union obtained 510,000 smoothbores and an astounding 3,253,000 rifles, including 303,000 breech loaders and 100,000 repeaters.
Yeah.
They were screwed
Okay.
before it started.
The industrial power, okay. Now, here's the thing they go. Rifle bullets, primarily mini balls, accounted for 90% of the 214,000 battlefield deaths and 469,000 wounded during the war. Okay?
About twice as many died.
Disease, yeah, disease. You know, measles was killing them better than mini balls. The Mexican War battles were great success because the Americans suffered fairly light losses, and they to them it validated the tactics, you know. And the Hardy's tactics was the standard infantry manual used by both sides at the outbreak of the war in 1861. All right? And the Army experience in Mexico to them validated Napoleonic principles. Okay? You fire a devastating volley followed by a charge with bayonets. That was what you were expected to do, okay? And it goes, these tactical lessons were misleading because in Mexico, relatively small arms fought only 7 pitched battles. The other thing was, we were lucky to be fighting the Mexicans. This is not to me, it's kind of racial slur or whatever. What I'm trying to tell you is, prior to the Mexican Revolution of 1910, the average Mexican peasant was crapped on by the elite. And they were drafted into the armies. When Santa Anna left Mexico City to go fight Taylor, 1/4 of his army deserted on the way there. They saw no reason to fight and die for the elite that were crapping on, you know, the poor peasant population all the time.
Yeah, the officer corps were all children of...
They were either of Spanish descent or from Spain
They
themselves.
weren't even college officers. They
And
were, you know,
the
you're the
average
son of
person was
somebody,
a
and that's
Native
it.
American who was locked into the land. You know, he was a peon. You know, he belongs to the hacienda and to the don that owns it. You know, why should I fight and die for the elite? What are they going to do? They're going to crap on me as soon as we get back from this war. All right. As a matter of fact, when they said after the war was over, the Mexican government did a study, and they said that our people aren't going to fight for us. You know, they see no reason to do it. And you know, how could America come and invade, land in our country, capture our capital in the middle of our country, and the people don't rise up? Well, Winfield Scott was pretty slick. One of the things he did when he landed in Veracruz is he told his soldiers, whenever you see a Catholic priest, give him a salute. They were like, you know, these Americans aren't bad. Now, for those of you who are really buffs of the Mexican War, the Mexicans had a problem with desertion. We had a minor problem with defectors. San Patricio Battalion. Okay?
Yeah.
Irish-American soldiers who got crapped on by their Protestant NCOs. The Mexicans said, the Protestants crap on you back in the old country. The Protestants crap on you here. We're Catholics. You're Catholics. Come join us and fight Protestants. All right? Now, some of them defected and got caught and got court-martialed, and they were going to be hung. And what they did is they set them up to be hung, and the signal for hanging them was when the American flag went up on the capital of Mexico, on Chapultepec Castle. So the last thing they would see before they died was the American flag going up over the capture of Mexico City. And then they yanked them out, and then the officer in charge, the people started looking at him. When are you going to cut him down? He goes, I was told to hang him, not to cut him down. And he just walked away. If you really want to have fun with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, that what ends the Mexican War, all Mexicans are white people. The treaty says so. Those of you that doubt it, Google white by law, Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. The treaty said that all Mexicans were considered white people. Because when the census came along, they weren't 3/5 like some others. They were ones. Yeah, a little bit of history you can throw out there next time you're on Jeopardy. I'm sorry, I've really run over time. I didn't even have questions and things. There not being any, I thank you very much for putting up with me for this time.
Thank you for watching. Please like, share, subscribe, and consider becoming a Patreon member for the ASP. Please check out the ASP Patreon page.